Welcome to ASRM Today, a podcast that takes a deeper dive into the current topics in reproductive medicine.
I'm Jeffrey Hayes, and today on the show we are discussing the Inclusive Family History Project. Joining me is Serena Chen and Lori Metz. I want to welcome you both to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us today.
So, jumping right in, what is some background on this project?
So I got looped in when Lori reached out. She had had some interesting patient encounters. I think, Lori, maybe you can talk about that. And it immediately struck me that this is an important issue. What we are finding is that as a society and as an industry, we have focused so much on donor conception, on the parents' interests, and on the physician's interests, on keeping things safe and doing identification. But we really haven't done a lot of looking at things from the donor-conceived children point of view. Mm-hmm. And how does life go on once the baby is made? And we're realizing that we have a responsibility to set the record straight, to remove shame and stigma and secrecy. And I think, you know, Lori, why don't you tell your story, your patient story?
Thanks so much. So I would say that about 2.5 years ago, and just so you know, I have a healthcare industry background. Mm-hmm. So I'm a therapist, but I spent over 20 years in the healthcare industry working in different types of medical settings. So, you know, I use that hat a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'm aging myself, of course, but I started my private practice about 15 years ago. So I run support groups, and in one of the support groups for recipient parents, the issue came up that they took their 6.5-year-old child to the doctor, and they hadn't yet shared with their child or the doctor that this recurrent problem the child was having could potentially be due to the donor. Mm-hmm. And the doctor was under the impression that the child was biologically related to the parent. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, oh, this is not good on so many different levels, right? I mean, we were already dealing with the fact that she was having a hard time coping with the fact that she used donor conception. And the other women in the group all agreed, there was a group of women, that they could understand how she was feeling. And many of them shared the same feelings, but did share it with the doctor. So I thought we need to fix this. And that's where my other hat came on. And I thought, you know, we really need to update the medical intake process in order to include not the word other when we're taking a family history, but to include donor conception and adoption, because, you know, these people should not have to fill out the word other, right? They do have medical histories, and if we don't know the medical history, that's okay too, but rather than go down that path of thinking we know, we really want to be providing quality care medically, emotionally, and financially, right? Not sending people through tests they don't need so that we can expedite the healing process as quickly as possible. So, of course, Serena Chen is always one of the first people I reach out to. She's just phenomenal. And she's one of the first people I ever told about the initiative. And she was like, yes, we need to do this. And so it became a matter of how do we do this? And, you know, through reaching out to people, advocating, and trying to find my way, I gathered some information. I wouldn't say research, because there's not enough information for research, but gathered information about what happened to the donor-conceived community when they went to the doctor. You know, and now, you know, very much we call them children in the RE world and in the ASRM world, but they're not children, right? It's donor-conceived people. Because they're adults, they only stay children for a couple of years, and so they do like the word people. And so I reached out to these donor-conceived people, and I said to them, you know, can you tell me your experiences, or can you share the experiences? And the one that stays in my mind most is this woman who was 40 years old who had a car accident. And she really suffered with horrible, horrible migraines and head injury. And because the father who raised her had migraines, they attributed it to migraines. But it was not migraines. Right, she had real significant inner ear damage, and so was suffering from vertigo all the time. So that's when she found out that she was donor conceived. So if we could open this up in a way where it's destigmatized and it's able to improve health outcomes, and by doing it by changing the intake form and then the intake process, you know, the people will feel better about themselves. The doctors and the nurses and whoever else is treating at that point of care will have more information. And, Sally, filling out the form, who has no idea about donor conception or possibly very little about adoption, will then say, wow, this is just another way of having a family. Yeah. So that was the impetus of this, quite frankly.
Yeah, seeing these real life examples of people who are not getting appropriate medical care because the doctor didn't have the appropriate medical history.
Yeah. And I have to give you one more story, if you don't mind, and then I won't give you too many stories. This is honestly not a good story, but my favorite story, and you'll understand why. So this is one woman whose both of her parents are doctors. And you would think that they're doctors. They would be so up on all of this. So this young woman struggled with GI problems for 20 years. It never dawned on them that it would be the donor. And they never really had the donor's health history to investigate that the causes were really because of the donor. And it turns out that there was a history of GI problems in the donor's medical record. And once they were able to identify it, they were able to get the GI problems under control. And she's a nurse now, this woman. So it's interesting how people don't think about it. You could be 50 years old and go to the ER, they ask for family history, you forget you're adopted. It's not the first thing that comes to your mind. So we want to trigger it, take the onus off of the person and place it almost where it belongs when you're accessing healthcare.
Well, it's interesting because as a physician, the electronic medical record is one of the banes of my existence. We associate the electronic medical record and all the documentation we have to do actually associated with physician burnout. But this is a really powerful tool that we can use to literally change every single encounter that every single patient has with every single provider. Because if it's routine in all the forms around the globe, then just as Lori said, it's completely normalized. That everybody is asked at every visit, what's your family history? Were you conceived with donor egg, donor sperm? Were you adopted? It makes a difference.
I love that she said that before, because you hear this all the time from the doctors, but I never really realized the impact of it. So that was a great analogy. So what happened was, years ago, I was involved in the first e-prescribing project, which was the impetus for medical records. So you know that you can have control over the fields, but things have grown so exponentially. So Joe Cody, who I had worked with at Resolve, he was the chair, one of the chairs of one of Resolve Advocacy Days a few years back. I contacted him about a year or so ago, maybe a little bit more than a year ago. And Joe has been instrumental, really, in having this brought to the forefront of the global initiative. We started with the United States. And what happened was, it was a combination of the timing being perfect and the need being there.
So there's actually groups that make guidelines,
yes,
right? That and set the standards so that EMR companies, anybody using or designing history forms and things like that, they actually look to these standards.
They do. They look to the standards, and the significance of all this is typically these standards are adopted by Medicaid. Medicare. So we know all the insurers and all the healthcare systems look to Medicare and Medicaid to what they're using. And they model after that. So the standards are suggested. They're not required. And so ASRM, of course, comes in so loud and clear, right? We need the doctors and the medical voice to say, well, let's include this in our record when it becomes available. So they were in the middle of meeting with the Global
Alliance for Genomics and Health.
I am so bad right now.
GA4GH.org.
Yeah. Thank you. Really bad at them. And we've met with them several times. They're really lovely people and very receptive and very open. And they're in the process of looking at the pedigree section. And what was so exciting was that in this section, they're doing step parents. They're doing foster parents. They're really looking at nature nurture. And they needed a little education, really, about what fertility was, because they thought it was all IVF. And so Joe and I were really able to have an impact. And Joe, because of his experience and his expertise, really speaks all the technology language.
A group, this GA4GH.org, Global Alliance for Genomics and Health.
Thank you.
That sets a not-for-profit think tank that sets guidelines and standards to start there with them saying, yes, everybody should ask about donor conception, I think will make it a lot easier for us to then put it in ASRM guidelines and hopefully propagate it to all the other medical fields.
So what they did was actually they asked us what terminology we should use.
Right.
And so we went out and we surveyed doctors, nurses, lawyers, intended parents, recipient parents, donor-conceived people. And you helped so much in getting other doctors to help give their opinion, which is, which is wonderful. And so those were the terms that we brought to them. And so they're now incorporating those terms. And then just so the end user realizes once it's in place, they could always change the terms if they don't want that term in their practice, but the field will be there. And what's so exciting about this moment in time is that the terminology has been accepted, which means the fields will be built. And that is the biggest lift, I think, that we could ask for. Because now what we're looking to really is the operations of building the field. And once the field is built, we're going to look to ASRM and people to champion this so that we can have hopefully large integrated healthcare systems, be able to adopt it because we need the adaptation there because as we were saying before, this all starts with ASRM, right? It starts with how the baby is created, but then the baby becomes, a child, and then they grow up and become a person, and they're going to go to a cardiologist. We're going to start with the pediatrician, the cardiologist, and we want them to ask. And so when you go into a large system, then what's going to happen with that large system is the chart is going to follow them through. And those are the doctors we really need to get on board as well for this effort. And, that's a big piece of that.
Yeah, by standardizing it in the medical record, we can literally change providers' behavior and thinking around this issue.
Well, if advocating is sort of the first step, right, in making this happen, then what else can people do to help? Is there anything at this stage that people can do?
Well, we really want people to start thinking about this whole idea of making, donor conception and talking about it and logging it and routine and standard and open. And I think it would be great if people connect with the donor-conceived community. It is donorconceived.community.org.
It is. It's in Donor Conceived Community, and they are looking at a lot of different aspects of it. There's several groups around, but the Donors Conceived Community works a lot on the mental health aspect and giving support and providing support. Melissa Lindsay started that. She's the founder of it, and she's the president now, and the organization is growing.
Yeah, so I think, and they actually won an ASRM grant this year. So I think that it's a great group for providers and people who don't deal with donor conception on a regular basis to really understand all the issues. Ultimately, we will be looking for test sites and people to respond to when ASRM looks at the guidelines and hopefully getting it into ASRM guidelines and then ACOG and AMA. So we are going to be looking for help with all of that.
Yes.
Yeah, and they're going to look at the interoperability of it because that'll be really important. And, that's like a key word that all the doctors probably hate at this point. So, and then the other piece I think that people could do right now is just along the lines of what you were saying is talk about it, right? When you go to the doctor, say to them, do you want to know how I was conceived? And we want to empower the doctors and the nurses and everybody who's looking at the forms to feel comfortable and confident in how they're responding to that information.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes you just don't have the words, you don't have the language on what you shouldn't say.
Yeah.
So that's the other piece of what we want to work on really is just educating the professional community on this piece of it because it's huge. The technology is great, but if the human intervention doesn't match it, then we're not going to succeed. So we need everything to work together. So the timing of ASRM letting us do the soapbox today and talk about it is just perfect. Because by the time we're ready for a test site, everybody will be ready to hear more about it and learn more about it. And DCC is great, and they are putting together professional groups. I am proud to say they recently appointed me as one of the mental health advisors to the professional
Congratulations.
Group. Thank you. And, we're excited about that. Very excited about it.
Well, fantastic. And before we run out of time, I just want to ask, are there any other closing thoughts you'd like people to walk away with. And I want to remind our listeners that we will put links in our show notes to these websites that we've mentioned so that you can just click on them, scroll up, click on them, and get some more information. Is there anything else that you would like to point people towards or would want them to know?
I think if people want more information about the interoperability fee or how if they're interested in being a test site, to please, they can go to my website if they want, or contact me, or they can contact Joe or Serena. I think that would be great. Or all happy to respond.
Yeah, we will be posting. We've been posting about it, and we will continue updating people.
Okay.
And then I think on the other side of it, if people want to learn about, becoming comfortable in talking to the donor-conceived community, to please don't hesitate to reach out, because I've also surveyed people on that. And, some of the responses you get, I think, you would really like to empower the professional community in how to respond, where everybody feels comfortable in their own skin in doing it. So I think that would be fabulous. So we're happy to do the training. The best comment I got about this was last year I was here talking about it, just very, very informally. And a woman came up to me yesterday, and she stopped me after one of the chats they were having upstairs. And she said, I have to tell you that since you mentioned this, I keep telling all the pediatricians who work in our center to ask if the child is donor conceived. She said, so thank you, because they're starting to ask. And I thought that was just
That's
great.
wonderful.
That is absolutely wonderful. Serena Chen, Lori Metz, thank you so much for being able to take time out. I know we're all busy here at ASRM 2023 in New Orleans, and we just thank you so much for being able to do this.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And if you have any questions about this show or any of our shows, you can email me, asrm@asrm.org. And until next time, I'm Jeffrey Hayes, and this is ASRM Today.
This concludes this episode of ASRM Today. For show notes, author information, and discussions, go to asrmtoday.org. This material is copyrighted by the American Society for Reproductive Medicine and may not be reproduced or used without express consent from ASRM. ASRM Today series podcasts are supported in part by the ASRM Corporate Member Council.
The information and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of ASRM and its affiliates. These are provided as a source of general information and are not a substitute for consultation with a physician.